Revenge with Karen.
Understood, waiting for your further instructions. I knew exactly how far gone we were when Evan stood at the end of the conference table, half drunk on applause, and said, into a live mic, in front of the entire executive team, Karen's been riding this company's coattails since dial-up internet. The board howled. Even the CFO, who used to share her sandwich with me back when we couldn't afford vending machine snacks, chuckled behind her hand like it was just boys being boys. I sat there, sipping my coffee like it wasn't turning to battery acid in my throat. Then came the kicker. She's nothing to this company, Evan said, smirking directly at me like it was foreplay. Her biggest contribution was picking the font for our first logo. Cue another wave of laughter, deeper this time, meaner, like they'd been waiting to say it but needed Evan's permission to let it out. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just nodded slowly, looked around the room full of former interns I'd personally coached through their first investor calls, and said, well then, I'll step aside gracefully. Gracefully. That word's doing a lot of lifting here. Because what I really wanted to say was, you smug, overcooked frat goblin, I built this company while you were still learning to spell synergy. But no, I kept my grace, because there's something about humiliation that sharpens the mind, like cold steel on wet stone. And look, if you're listening to this, and you've ever been in a meeting where someone publicly rewrote your entire legacy in 7 seconds and a joke, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and maybe like this story. It really keeps the team going, and let's be honest, 95% of y'all are freeloading this saga without clicking the damn button. Anyway, the VP of Legal, woman named Maria who once hugged me when her divorce finalized, just kind of shifted in her seat. She didn't laugh, didn't say a word, but her eyes darted to me like she was checking if I was still breathing. I was, just barely. Evan kept going, of course. He thanked the men who brought us here like we'd crash-landed on the moon, skipped my name, skipped half the damn early team, but made sure to include Tyler, same marketing clown who once spent 6 figures on an Instagram campaign for a product that didn't exist yet. And the board? Oh, they ate it up. Golf claps and cigars, and that's our guy. As if Evan hadn't had his LinkedIn bio ghostwritten by ChatGPT and his financial acumen spoon-fed by consultants he barely paid attention to. They thought I'd break, that I'd pack up my office, take a few sobbing laps around HR, sign whatever NDA they slid across the table. But I didn't. Instead, that night I went home, pulled a dusty manila folder from the back of my locked file drawer, and poured myself a glass of the good scotch. Labeled in Sharpie, faded but still legible, Clauses Holdings Contingencies. Because 3 years ago, when Evan was begging private equity vultures not to gut his precious brand, I made a deal. Quietly, legally, strategically. The clause I added to our shareholder charter? Let's just say the joke's about to be very much on him. The day after that little public gut punch, I walked into the office at 7:12 a.m., same time I always did, even when Evan was still director of potential with a cube near the copier. I bypassed my usual standing desk, the glass-walled strategic initiatives corner they gave me to make me feel visible, and headed straight to HR. No tears, no scene, just a printed resignation letter and a slight smile like I was ordering a turkey sandwich. Rachel in HR blinked like I was speaking Morse code. You're resigning? She said, like I'd just threatened to burn the place down. But you're Karen. I handed her the envelope. Just need a clean exit. Effective Friday. Let's keep it simple. Truth is, I didn't want the performance. I didn't need the farewell party with a half-eaten bundt cake and a sad PowerPoint of blurry team-building retreats. I just needed the paperwork to clear. Needed Evan to believe I'd finally accepted my fate as the ghost of operations past. By 9 o'clock, the company Slack was lit up with, wait, is Karen actually leaving? And she was like, the backbone, right? To oof, bad timing with the acquisition stuff lol. Evan, of course, posted a performative thank you for your years of support message with a stock photo of a sunrise, and the quote transitions are opportunities in disguise. The man has never had an original thought in his life. But his smugness, that was real. That afternoon, I walked past the conference room and caught a glimpse of him clapping shoulders with the 2 new board members, both venture cowboys with too many vowels in their last names and no moral compass. One of them even said, now that the emotional baggage is gone, we can close this deal clean. Emotional baggage. That's what I was to them. Not the woman who wrote the original systems protocol. not the one who secured our first government contract when Evan was too hungover to show up for the bid. Just a road bump in their $125 million runway. So I let them believe it. Let Evan strut around like a peacock in a Patagonia vest, talking about legacy liquidity events and scaling without friction. I smiled. I nodded. I held the elevator for him when he was on the phone bragging to his college roommate about finally cleaning house. And then I went home, pulled out the manila folder I hadn't touched in 3 years. It still smelled faintly like burnt toner and Marlboros. I flipped through the contents: corporate charter amendments, equity statements, old email threads from when Evan was still human. And nestled in the middle, between an old stock certificate and a post-it that read contingent trigger, 49% activation, was the document he signed without even reading. Back when the company had 2 weeks of payroll left, and he was panicking over losing his Tesla. He came to me, desperate, said, "Can you help float us until the wire clears?" And I said sure, on one condition: would purchase Class B voting shares, silent but binding. No dividends, no board seat. Just authority in case of, well, something like this. Evan called it a formality, and then he forgot. Or maybe he thought I did. Either way, I had 53% of the vote, buried in a corporate drawer under old authorizations, masked by a shell LLC with a name he wouldn't recognize if it slapped him across the face with a quarterly report. Poured myself another scotch. Then I picked up my phone. First call Maria, the VP of Legal, straight to voicemail, which I expected. "Hey, just letting you know the exit's real, no hard feelings, but I'd appreciate a heads up before the compliance report goes out. Call me." Second call, my cousin Ellie, mergers attorney in Chicago. "You still got that contact at Trimark Capital? I might need a back channel to their due diligence team." Third call, burner number I hadn't used since the acquisition scare of 2020. Rang twice. A gruff voice answered, "You calling for what I think you are? I'm pulling the contingency." Silence. Then you waited longer than I thought. I had to be sure. Well, the voice said, almost amused, "Hell's about to get real comfortable for him." I hung up. Then I grabbed a pen and started making a list: names, roles, pressure points. The quiet exit was done. Time to set the stage. 3 years ago, Evan was pacing our living room like a coked-up stockbroker in a hurricane. His Bluetooth earpiece blinked red every 5 seconds. But he wasn't actually on a call, just pretending, so he could shout things like, "We need another quarter of runway," and tell them we're pre-revenue but post-traction, which means absolutely nothing to anyone except other guys in Patagonia vests trying to impress women named Ashley. Meanwhile, I was sitting at the dining table with a yellow legal pad, a calculator, and a glass of 2-day-old Pinot, trying to do what I always did: fix the fire without getting singed. The company was 23 days from folding. Payroll was late. Our primary investor had ghosted us after Evan called her overly emotional on a group call. And someone, definitely Evan, had greenlit a $60K crypto-themed marketing campaign with a Times Square billboard that said, "Blockchain your dreams." We didn't even use blockchain. Never had. Still don't. I told Evan I had a solution. I said I could move some assets around, pull from my old trust, cash out some underperforming rates, and float the company until he landed another investor. But I added, sliding a 2-page document across the table, "I want security." Barely looked at it. "Whatever you want, babe," he said, already halfway through drafting an email to fundmebro@gmail.com. "Just don't let legal find out." He signed. Right there, with a big pen that still had the cap on the back. Didn't read the clause at the bottom. Didn't see the words non-revocable contingent control or the phrase Class B voting majority may be transferred without board notice in times of declared liquidity emergency. Didn't even ask about the shell company I'd set up months before, Williams Strategic Holdings, LLC, a Delaware ghost that existed for exactly this kind of rainy day. To him, it was a lifeline. To me, it was an insurance policy with teeth, and I'd kept it silent, dormant, buried beneath compliance paperwork, asset redistribution logs, archived board approvals that no one had looked at since the CFO started taking Adderall just to survive quarterly reviews. The next morning, I wired $412,000 into the company's operating account. Saved 43 jobs, deferred bankruptcy. And Evan, he gave me a limp thank you and immediately posted a motivational LinkedIn update about resilience and betting on yourself when the odds are stacked. Never once mentioned my name, never once asked what I had actually bought with that money, But I knew. I now controlled 53% of the company's voting shares, not the cash flow, not the buzz, not the PR polish Evan chased like a golden retriever after a tennis ball. No, I owned the skeleton keys to the kingdom, and I said nothing. For 3 years. I watched as Evan held court at conferences, calling himself a visionary founder. I bit my tongue while he talked over me in meetings, and called my strategic plans emotionally driven. I endured his offhand comments to the board like, "Karen, she's just here to give things that feminine touch." He never once suspected that his entire throne was propped up on the foundation I held in one locked drawer and 3 digital backups across 2 encrypted drives. So when I pulled out that folder last week, I flipped open that paper trail with a glass of scotch in one hand and a burner phone in the other, I wasn't starting something new. I was unfreezing a weapon. A quiet, deadly leverage that had been maturing in the dark. Every smug meeting, every snide remark, every time he let his hand rest just a second too long on the marketing intern's back at the bar after quarterly close. It had all been building toward this. Because Karen Williams, the woman he told the board was just emotional support, was the majority stakeholder of the empire he thought he ruled. And the day he signed that clause, that was the day he crowned me queen. He just didn't know it yet. The compliance officer's name was Janelle, and if you ever want to meet a woman who could spot a forged signature from 30 feet away while filing her taxes and sipping a cold brew, it was her. We met at a tiny coffee shop 6 blocks from HQ, one of those places where the baristas wear beanies year-round and the menu calls a small a humble. I picked the table by the window. No Wi-Fi, no cameras, no crosstalk. She arrived 5 minutes late, looking over her shoulder like she was walking into a drug deal. "You sure this is okay?" she asked, dropping into the seat across from me. "You're technically not even still a shareholder," I said, smiling. "Still in the system." Janelle raised an eyebrow. "Been out of operations for what, 2 weeks? People are already acting like you never existed. They're wiping your name off process maps. Let them." I took a sip of my burnt espresso. "You got the draft?" She pulled a thick envelope from her purse and laid it between us like it was a bomb. "Authorization stack from 2019 to 2022, she said. "Buried under your name, through Williams Holdings. The Class B conversion logs are intact. Her ownership still live in the ledger. Evan never voided it. I didn't even need to open the packet. I already knew it was there, my control, still nestled in the guts of the corporate machine. But I asked the question anyway, watching her reaction closely. "Do they know?" Janelle gave a dry little laugh. "Please." The last time Evan looked at an ownership matrix, he thought it was a Sudoku puzzle. As long as you're not waving it in his face, he won't notice. No one in finance is going to poke the bear while the buyout's this close. "The report?" I asked. "Due Friday," she said, "part of the quarterly compliance disclosures to the buyer. If they read it, they'll see you. If they don't," I leaned back. "Don't email it," she blinked. "What? I want it hard copy. No digital trail. Hand it to them at the meeting." 11:47 sharp. Janelle stared at me for a moment, then leaned forward and whispered, "You're really doing it, huh?" "Not burning the house down," I said. "I'm just turning off the lights before they throw a party in my living room." She nodded. "Ballsy, necessary." We left separately. She took the side exit. I stayed and finished my drink, staring into the dark roast like it held prophecy. Because Evan, sweet, oblivious Evan, was across town tweaking font choices in his precious buyout deck, like that's what makes a $125 million deal bulletproof. Same deck I already had a copy of, thanks to the marketing intern he tried to seduce last quarter. She emailed it to me at 2:04 a.m. with the subject line, "You didn't hear it from me." In the notes, he'd written, "Board cleared. CEO retains full voting power. Buyer assumes all equity transfer is clean." The arrogance was astounding. The man was trying to sell a castle built on sand and acting like he invented masonry. No due diligence, no backup, just pure, uncut confidence. I called Ellie again, my cousin, the merger's attorney. "Is the buyer still Greenridge Group?" "Yep," she said. "They think they're getting a steal. Evan's pitching it like the company's turnkey." "Good, that works in my favor." "What's your end game, Karen?" "Depends," I said. "Do they like surprises? Because here's the thing. Every executive in that office thinks compliance is a nuisance. A box to check. A snooze fest buried in footnotes and audit logs. Compliance is where the real power lives. It's the graveyard of secrets, if you know where to dig. And Janelle, she was my gravedigger. Back at the office, Evan paraded around with a fresh haircut and a suit he couldn't quite pull off. He was high on ego and too distracted by his own reflection to notice the tightening noose around his legacy. I passed him in the hallway later that day. He gave me a nod, like I was a memory he'd already filed away under former assets. "Big week coming up," he said. "Sure is," I replied. "Hope everything's accounted for." He laughed like I was talking about receipts, but I wasn't. I was talking about power. Mine. And he had no damn clue. The gala was held at the Belmore Country Club, the kind of place with chandeliers that looked like upside-down wedding cakes and valet attendants who judged you based on tire brand. Evan had reserved the East Ballroom, filled it with investors, legacy employees, more half-sincere smiles than a political fundraiser. Everyone wore rented tuxedos and fake humility. And me, I wore red, not crimson, not burgundy. Red. The kind that makes men forget what they were bragging about mid-sentence. He told me to keep it tasteful. So I wore the dress he hated, the one from the Miami Leadership Summit, back when we still shared hotel rooms and secrets. I wore it not because I wanted his attention, because I wanted the whole damn room to remember who walked in beside him, even if they'd all pretended to forget. He strutted through the crowd like a cruise director, introducing his team, shaking hands, over-laughing at jokes he didn't understand. When the string quartet wrapped their 7th Coldplay cover, the lights dimmed, and Evan climbed up on stage with a flute of champagne and the posture of a man who'd never been told no in public. Speech started predictably enough. This company was a dream, a garage, and a good idea, blah, blah, blah. Half the room pretended to tear up. The other half checked their phones. But then, as he turned toward the front tables, his tone shifted. "This," he said, gesturing broadly, "this is the team that built our empire. These men, these visionaries, these gladiators of growth," he named names. One by one. CFO, head of sales, board chair, even Tyler, walking HR violation who once accidentally ordered 400 branded shot glasses instead of client mugs. And then nothing. No mention of me. Not even a passing thank you to those who supported us in early stages. Not even a generic nod to our loved ones. Just silence. Intentional. Surgical. Like he was cutting me out of the photo while everyone was still smiling. I didn't blink. Didn't shift. Just sipped my drink and let the acid burn through my throat. Janelle, sitting 2 tables over, caught my eye. She raised an eyebrow, "Are you good?" And I gave her a small, sharp nod. Oh, I was good. After the speech, Evan came offstage glowing like he'd just baptized the company in his own ego. He pulled me aside near the terrace, close enough to the smokers to smell Marlboros and bourbon, but far enough from the crowd that no one could hear what he was about to say. "Didn't waste time." After the buyout, he said, loosening his tie, "I'm filing for divorce." I stared at him, blank as a wiped whiteboard. "You've outlived your usefulness, Karen," he said like he was ending a temp contract. I took another slow sip, understood. He blinked, confused, like he expected me to cry or slap him or beg for dignity. But I gave him nothing. Just silence and the soft clink of ice against crystal. He leaned in, voice low and smug. "Make this messy? You'll get a fair settlement, maybe even a consulting fee if you play nice." I met his eyes, held them, let him see the stillness. "Thank you," I said, "for the clarity." He smiled, smug as ever, and walked away. And that's when something inside me shifted. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't about teaching Evan a lesson or reclaiming credit. This was about erasure. He hadn't just insulted me. He hadn't just dismissed my work. He had tried to delete me from my own legacy. Rewrite history in real time. Turn me into a cautionary tale for what happens when you cling too long. I looked around the room, at the interns who still used my onboarding manual, the executives still parroting my cost savings model, the investors smiling at projections built on spreadsheets I personally verified. And they all believed his version of the story. That he built it, that he ran it. I was a supporting character at best. Fine, let him believe it. Let them all toast to his empire. Because when the ink dried on that buyout next week, every signature would need one thing he didn't have, mine. And before I gave it, I was going to take everything. Not for closure, not for justice, for accuracy. The meeting with the buyer's legal team wasn't in some downtown skyscraper with frosted glass and espresso machines humming in the lobby. It was in a nondescript executive suite at the Hyatt near the airport, anonymous, transient, and perfectly forgettable. The kind of place where billion-dollar deals begin with dry muffins and end in NDAs signed on wobbling conference tables. I arrived 5 minutes early. Didn't wear red this time. Wore black, structured blazer. No jewelry, no perfume, just presence. like a shadow with a bank account. The woman who greeted me, Natalie, outside counsel for the Greenridge Group, looked like she'd been raised by litigation wolves. Silver-rimmed glasses, a binder thicker than a Bible, and the kind of handshake that makes grown men sweat. She motioned toward the conference table. We weren't expecting to speak with a former advisor. I'm not here as an advisor, I said, placing a single envelope on the table. I'm here as a majority shareholder. Natalie paused mid-share pull. Excuse me? I slid the envelope forward. Inside, notarized ownership certifications, the original Class B share transfer contract, complete with Evan's signature, and my LLC's holding documents, and a copy of the company's amended charter, the part nobody reads because it's buried under a section titled Non-Preferred Contingency Events. They read in silence. I watched their eyebrows go up like dollar signs on a slot machine. I don't believe Mr. Williams disclosed this to us, Natalie said finally. No, I said he didn't, because he doesn't remember signing it. He was desperate. The company was collapsing. He asked for a miracle, and I gave it to him. But miracles come with terms. The second lawyer, gray suit, white hair, looked like he was born inside a courtroom, spoke next. Do you understand the implications of this? I do, I said. That's why I'm here before the signing. Natalie flipped through the pages again, slower this time. This clause, she said, tapping the bottom of one page, requires your approval for any equity-altering transactions exceeding $20 million. That includes acquisitions, I said. And Evan doesn't know? I smiled. Evan thinks I'm a ghost. They looked at each other. A silent lawyer language passed between them, equal parts panic and intrigue. And if we go forward with the signing as planned, the man asked, the deal's invalid. I can legally block it. Worse, I can challenge every representation he's made in your due diligence folder, because none of it includes me. Natalie nodded slowly. You've already reviewed our data room access logs. Correct. Janelle gave me a printout. Your team hasn't seen a single mention of Williams Holdings, which means Evan either deliberately hid me or he's too stupid to remember the foundation of his own empire. The air changed then. They stopped seeing me as a liability, started seeing me as a lifeline. Natalie leaned forward. What do you want? Stability, I said. Continuity. Clean transition. And Evan is a distraction you don't need. They didn't smile, but they didn't argue either. After a long silence, Natalie said, would you be willing to step in temporarily as interim CEO? I folded my hands. I'd consider it. She raised a brow. You'd consider taking control of the company you secretly own. Don't need control to feel powerful, I said. I just need the truth to stand upright. More silence. Then the gray-haired man leaned back, exhaled through his nose, and said, this might actually clean up the structure. Hell, you're more competent than half the execs we've seen in that office. Natalie scribbled a note. We'll need a formal declaration of your holdings and a signed statement for our internal governance board. You'll deliver that? At 11:47, I said. Paused. That specific? Every chessboard needs timing, I said. This is mine. By the time I left the room, Natalie's assistant was already updating the stakeholder register. And across town, Evan was posing for headshots with a fake skyline behind him, blissfully unaware that while he was rehearsing his victory lap, I was rewriting the route. Not for revenge, not even for justice, for permanence. Evan spent the night before the signing sipping bourbon he couldn't pronounce and practicing his speech in front of the hallway mirror like he was accepting a damn Nobel Prize. I watched from the kitchen island, silent, swirling tea that had gone cold. He stood there, backlit like a stage actor, saying things like we proved them wrong, and this is the future we built together. Together. The irony almost made me laugh. He was still wearing his CEO casual uniform, Illard slacks, quarter zip, $900 sneakers he thought made him look younger. He kept checking his teeth in the reflection and practicing how to laugh when the buyer praised his vision. He was giddy, drunk on success that didn't belong to him. That never did. At one point, he glanced over and said, hey, you should sit front row tomorrow. They're reserving seats for the legacy team. Legacy team. As if I were just some mildly helpful ghost of quarterly reports past. I raised my mug in mock salute. Break a leg? He winked. Don't jinx me. Oh, honey, you've been jinxed for years. You just didn't see the curse coming. After he disappeared into his office to practice the closing again, this isn't the end, it's the beginning. I opened my phone and scanned through my list one last time. Janelle, check. Natalie, confirmed. Buyer's governance board, aligned. Legal credentials, printed and waiting in my tote bag, filed between a pack of gum and a pen I planned to sign his future with. Then came the message. 10:08 p.m. CFO Marcus T. You still going through with it? It hung there for a second, not in fear, in warning, like a last fire alarm before the charges blew. I typed slowly. Carefully, me, tomorrow morning. 11:47 sharp. He didn't reply. Didn't need to. Marcus had known something was off for weeks. The way I still showed up on old approvals. The way legal held off finalizing the shareholder summary. He wasn't stupid, just cautious. Smart enough to stay out of it, but loyal enough to throw me that text. I silenced the phone and went to bed. Laid next to Evan as he snored like a lawnmower left on idle, dreaming of fortune covers and podcast interviews where he got to say hustle culture without irony. Didn't know that the buyer's legal team had already updated the cap table to include Williams Holdings. Didn't know that the clause he signed 3 years ago had been validated by outside counsel, and that compliance was holding the physical report under Janelle's desk, waiting for my signal. Didn't know that at exactly 11:47 a.m. tomorrow, the paralegal in the boardroom would receive a call with one line. We're missing one approval. Mine, because I wasn't going to show up early. I wasn't going to sit in the audience and give him the pleasure of performing dominance. I was going to walk in at the precise second when the pen touched paper, when ego collided with reality, and turn his coronation into an autopsy. He dreamed of legacy. I planned his legend. Let him have the stage tonight. Let the board drink champagne early and celebrate like the money was already wired. Tomorrow, they'd learn who wired the power, who held the switch. The clock was ticking and the trap was quiet. Perfect. Silent, loaded, and in the dark, I finally smiled. The buyout meeting kicked off with the kind of smug punctuality only men with stock options and vanity plates can pull off. Evan stood at the head of the boardroom table in a tailored navy suit that screamed Forbes 30 under 30 finalist who aged out. The Greenridge team entered precisely at 10 o'clock a.m., briefcases in hand, unreadable behind designer glasses and courtroom smiles. Their paralegals followed, lugging binders and laptops, faces frozen in professional indifference. The board was already seated, some adjusting their collars, others trying to pretend this wasn't the most important day of their careers. The room buzzed with anticipation, the kind of tension that made assistants drop triple-shot espressos on marble floors and interns rehearse their polite chuckles for when Evan cracked his bootstrap to boardroom joke. Karen Williams was nowhere to be seen, not even a whisper of her name on the agenda. No extra chair set aside. No mention in the opening remarks. Evan took that as confirmation. She'd folded. She'd bowed out quietly like a good little ghost, drifted back into irrelevance so he could finish the empire he believed he'd built alone. He beamed. He gave his welcome speech, polished and phony, heavy on phrases like scalable innovation and disruption synergy. He cracked the joke. Turns out you can build Rome and be the Caesar, too, and the board laughed like trained seals, even though two of them didn't get the reference. Then came the signing ceremony. The stack of documents was brought out, thick enough to crush a small rodent, embossed with legal weight and financial finality. Evan sat down, uncapped a pen with the flourish of a man who thought the world was just a mirror reflecting his jawline. The buyer's lead counsel nodded. Final confirmation, she said. We have all board votes tallied, financial disclosures received, compliance documentation in hand. Evan raised the pen. And then a paralegal's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then frowned. Excuse me, he said, rising from his seat and stepping toward the corner of the room. He answered. Yes, pause. The room held its breath. Evan tapped his pen on the table, oblivious. He was moments away from signing the page that would trigger a $125 million wire transfer and crown him a titan. The paralegal's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Sir, we have a situation. Internal legal is on the line. They say we're missing one signature. Evan looked up, annoyed. A full board approval. It's not the board, the paralegal said. It's shareholder authorization. We need sign-off from the majority stakeholder. Evan's expression flickered. Just a beat. A wrinkle of confusion. I am the majority. The paralegal listened again, then slowly removed the phone from his ear and held it out. Sir, they say we mean Karen Williams. She owns 53%. The words dropped like a brick in a baptismal font. Silence. Evan stared at the paralegal, as if the man had just spoken in tongues. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone unplugged him from reality. Across the room, the buyer's legal team froze, eyes darting between each other like students realizing they'd studied the wrong material. Excuse me. Evan said, his voice hoarse, brittle. She's listed as majority Class B stakeholder under Williams Holdings, LLC. The paralegal continued, his voice robotic. Clause 17B, triggered during a declared liquidity crisis in FY22. Signed and notarized by you. Evan dropped his pen. It rolled off the table and clinked on the tile floor. I never, but he had. And now, for the first time in his life, there was no room to bluff, no fast-talking the facts, no deleting names from pitch decks, no staging another internal coup. He was no longer the emperor of anything. Buyer's team leaned in, quietly whispering, faces now lined with something between suspicion and curiosity. The board members began shifting in their seats, some avoiding eye contact entirely, others suddenly remembering the name Williams from years back. One even whispered, "Wait, wasn't she?" But before anyone could finish the sentence, the boardroom doors opened, and in walked Karen. The boardroom doors didn't slam open. They didn't creak dramatically. They simply opened, smooth, controlled like everything else I'd planned, and I walked in. Heels quiet, expression unreadable, tote bag on my arm like I'd just come from a grocery run instead of private war. Heads turned first in confusion, then in realization, then in pure, cold panic. I scanned the room. Evan was seated at the head of the table, still holding the edge of the desk like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. Paper rested under his hand, half-signed. The page that would have cemented him as a multimillionaire, revered, published, immortalized in entrepreneurial folklore. Too late. I gave the room a small nod and said, as casually as if I were answering a roll call, "Did someone call for the majority shareholder?" The buyer's counsel, Natalie, exhaled like she'd just been holding her breath through a fire drill. "Miss Williams," she said, standing. "Thank you for coming." Rest of the room stayed seated, frozen, except Evan. He tried to rise, but his legs didn't cooperate. His hands were trembling slightly, but enough for me to notice. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, and in a way he was, a ghost of his own making. The woman he'd erased in speeches, in filings, in boardroom whispers. I placed the folder on the table, flipped it open, and slid the top page forward. "This is my shareholder authorization," I said. "Approval for the acquisition with amendments." Natalie glanced at her associate, who began scanning the document while scribbling notes furiously. Evan found his voice at last. She doesn't have standing. This is a closed executive session." "Wrong," Natalie cut in before I could. "Miss Williams's Class B ownership gives her full legal standing. Clause 17B is active, verified, and time-stamped. You signed it yourself, Mr. Williams." Evan looked around the room for someone, anyone, to back him up. The board stared at their laps. The CFO suddenly found something fascinating in the grain of the table. I continued evenly. "My conditions are simple. 1. Evan Williams resigns, effective immediately. 2. The board is dissolved and restructured per the transition schedule attached. 3. All executive severance packages outlined in the original proposal are nullified, effective retroactively as of last quarter's close." Natalie nodded. "This aligns with our governance adjustment preferences. We're prepared to sign today under these terms." Evan slammed his hand down. "You can't do this. This is my company." "No," I said, voice calm as a sermon. "It was our company. Then you made it yours. Now it's mine." He lunged for the contract. "This is invalid. This is a setup." Legal blocked his hand before he could touch it. "Mr. Williams," buyer's counsel said sharply, "you no longer have the authority to interfere in this process. Stand down." Evan turned to me then, eyes wild, a man realizing his parachute is made of paper. "Karen, we built this, don't do this. We can renegotiate." I leaned forward, looked him square in the eyes, and said, "You told a room full of people I was nothing, that I outlived my usefulness, that I was emotional baggage." I picked up the pen he had dropped earlier, signed the revised agreement in smooth, steady ink, then smiled, just slightly. "You said I was nothing to this company," I whispered. "Now I own it." The silence was absolute. Natalie closed the folder, shook my hand. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories."